Hey, how's it going, guys? Joe Rogan is taking his podcast exclusively to Spotify in a licensing deal with potentially more than $100 million. That would be one of the largest deals in the rapid growing podcast business. Joe Rogan has become one of the most influential money-making machine podcast hosts in recent years, especially with his popular podcast videos on YouTube. Spotify, one of the fastest growing music stream platforms, fearlessly disrupts the Apple's music dominance, is now worth more than $35 billion. With no doubt, there's so much to unpack with this marriage between Spotify and Joe Rogan. But there's more going on here than just a massive licensing agreement. In this video, we will break down the entire story, take a deep analysis on their business, and most importantly, discover who is the true winner from this historical deal. Joe Rogan started his podcast, The Joe Rogan Experience, in 2009 with just himself and a microphone. 11 years later, it's still just himself and his microphone with 5 employees. What has changed? The size of his audience. Every single month, The Joe Rogan Experience has averagely
it's like 190 million downloads a month.
And that is a massive number. Just help you guys put this number into perspective. The CNN, a multi-billion-dollar blue-chip media giant with more than 4,000 employees worldwide, spending hundreds of millions of dollars on marketing, yet can only achieve 148 million views in their best month. So how did Joe Rogan build such a massive audience that is larger than CNN with just a microphone and 5 employees? People often say luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. This couldn't be more true to Joe Rogan. He started the JRE podcast in the early days of YouTube when the platform was especially hungry for the content creators with the unique ability to build a big audience base. Joe Rogan was already a household name from his past work on shows like News Radio and View Factor. He knows how to build his distribution into the design of his content. From a content creation perspective, Joe Rogan Experience breaks all the rules. For example, in the world that is dominated by short attention spans, his content actually averages more than 1 hour long. That actually matches YouTube recommendation algorithm. The longer viewers watch, the more highly YouTube will rank the content, and the more it will be promoted to more viewers. Also, Joe Rogan is able to find a very large and underserved audience group. He has found his niche as a defender of free speech in the era of political correctness. His show has invited many controversial guests and did many controversial things in front of the camera. Despite some of the polarizing judgment he received, Joe Rogan managed to build a massive amount of audience by doing just podcasting. 13 million subscribers in total on 2 of his YouTube channels, 9.5 million followers on Instagram, 6 million followers on Twitter, and he even has 500,000 members on Reddit community. Over a span of 11 years, with only his microphone, Joe Rogan has built one of the largest personal audience in the world, and that eventually caught Spotify's acquisition radar. $100 million. That seems like a big number, especially to a team of only 6 people. But is this amount really that big? Let's do some math. Joe Rogan gets 190 million downloads every single month. The industry average CPM in podcasting is about $20. CPM means for cost per 1,000 listeners. Let's say Joe Rogan gets about $15 CPM at a very conservative estimation. That would mean his podcast made about $2,850,000 every month, or $34 million as revenue per year. That actually matches Forbes' recent article that mentioned Joe Rogan made $30 million in 2019 as the highest paid podcaster in the world. Joe Rogan is basically the Michael Jordan of the podcast world. Suddenly, the $100 million price tag doesn't seem that high anymore. Spotify is going to make this money back in just over 3 years. And let's not forget, the real price for Spotify is the amount of new paying subscribers that will sign up as an exclusive platform of Joe Rogan Experience content. Let's say only 10% of Joe Rogan subscribers on YouTube ended up subscribing to Spotify and paying them $10 a month. That is 1.3 million new users paying $120 a year. And that translates to $156 million as annual revenue for Spotify. All of this leads me to believe that the true value of this deal is actually bigger than the reported $100 million. Let's do a comparison. The Ringer, another recent acquisition by Spotify, was making roughly $18 million a year in revenue. and Spotify paid over $200 million for it. On the other hand, the Joe Rogan Experience can possibly earn twice that much money, but Spotify only pays half of the price. Suddenly, the $100 million price tag seems like a huge bargain. So, who is really the winner here? Even if Joe Rogan successfully managed to negotiate a higher price than $100 million, let's say $150 million as the final deal, I still believe the real winner here is Spotify. That's not to say that it's not a good deal for Joe Rogan. No matter what the final purchase price is, being a Spotify exclusive partner is a huge milestone for any content creators in the world. The real cost for Joe Rogan is the opportunity cost of removing his contents from the world's largest platforms for undisclosed amount of time. Spotify has 286 million active users. That's only 10% of YouTube's 2.5 billion active user base. Joe Rogan's exclusive move to a much smaller platform will cost him a significant number of new subscribers and the potential revenue that comes with them. For Spotify, this is a slam dunk, and everyone knows it. Since the Joe Rogan deal was announced, Spotify's stock price went up over 11%, contributing roughly $3 billion in market cap. Spotify's victory extends beyond just the financial benefits from this deal. Securing an exclusive deal with Joe Rogan shows that Spotify is thinking bigger than just music and a podcast. They're showing the ambitions that they want to be the #1 platform for audio contents in the world. Building an exclusive platform has been one of the most dominant business models for the past 20 years. The huge success of companies like Netflix and Airbnb have attracted a flood of venture capital money. All these platforms do different things. Netflix streams TV shows, Airbnb connects property owners with travelers, YouTube allows people to share online videos, Amazon connects buyers and sellers. Recently, the lines between these platforms have been disrupted. Amazon and Apple began to stream movies. YouTube and Facebook moved to the live TV industry. Why? Because these platforms have all realized that they're competing for the same and limited resource, your attention. If you're browsing on Instagram, you are not watching shows on Netflix. If you are listening to podcasts, you are not reading breaking news on CNBC. People's attention is so limited and important, and even Reed Hastings, the CEO of Netflix, when people ask him what he thinks about the Disney's direct competition to Netflix, he said the biggest competitor to Netflix is not Disney Plus, it is our sleep. Every platform in the world is trying to build on the same real estate of 24 hours in our day. So how does Spotify compete in the super competitive platform and attention war? When people hear Spotify's name, they often think about the music more than podcasts. And that is why this Joe Rogan deal is so significant, because it shows Spotify is competing to be the biggest name in audio. Let's take a look at the Spotify's recent major acquisitions. They spent over $600 million investing on podcast content and machine learning technology. Spotify is essentially building a programmatic marketplace for podcast creators and advertisers. There has never been a single podcast company that sells ads, makes contents, has the popular podcast players, and at the same time gives creators the tools to create their own shows. Spotify now has all of that. The only missing piece is to get more people to use the platform exclusively. Big names like Joe Rogan, along with his massive library, can bring people to Spotify and stay with Spotify. Podcast is one of the fastest growing advertising mediums in the US, growing almost 40% in 2019. However, the lack of programmatic advertising in the podcast industry has been always a pain for years. Without the means to target a specific audience across the shows, some advertisers have shied away from the podcast advertising completely. Spotify wants to change that. In the early 2020, Spotify launches their own programmatic advertising tool called Streaming Ad Insertion. It uses machine learning technology and allows targeted ads to be placed into specific podcast shows when people listen to them. In other words, Spotify can do advertising on podcasts the same way as what Google does for advertising on YouTube videos. It's a huge deal. An advertising monopoly on an entirely new medium like podcast, especially one that will explode after introduction of a streaming ad insertion, Spotify can totally own the entire new space. At the end of the day, Joe Rogan is getting paid more than $100 million to smoke pot with Elon Musk on Spotify instead of YouTube. It's hard to be upset with that result. But the real winner, Spotify, gained an instant $3 billion on their market cap since the acquisition. That shows not only Spotify and Joe Rogan are excited about this deal, but also the investors are betting on their new exciting future. And finally, in the same way that Netflix drives up the price of talents for TV studios, Spotify's acquisition of Joe Rogan Experience may create a premium market for individual creators on platforms like YouTube. If that really happens in the future, Joe Rogan, true to his brand Joe Rogan Experience, will deliver one more big win for all the small creators around the world. Alright, that's pretty much what I want to share for this Spotify and the Joe Rogan deal. Hope you guys are enjoying it. If you are new to this channel, my name is Vic. I make videos every week to share some of my thoughts on what is going on in the financial market, and also what are the trade ideas or investment opportunities that you should pay attention to in the market. If you are interested in the world of finance and business and find my videos have been helpful and valuable to you, please consider subscribing. Again, thanks for watching guys, and I will see you guys soon.